Most people picture the moon as the most familiar object in the night sky. We have walked on it, we have photographed every crater, we have mapped every mountain range. It is the one place beyond Earth that feels known. I used to think that too. The problem is the more you actually look at what NASA's own files say. Not the press releases, the actual mission transcripts, the internal memos, the data that never made it into a headline, the more that picture starts to come apart. There are things in those files that the agency has never fully explained. Not never got around to explaining. Never fully explained. Why did the moon ring like a bell for over 3 hours? After a controlled impact in 1969, when no natural body should behave that way, why did the seismometers the Apollo crews left behind record waves that move through the moon in patterns that only make sense if the interior is hollow or structured in a way that no geological model has ever predicted? Why did multiple Apollo astronauts report seeing things on the lunar surface that were never discussed in any official mission debrief made available to the public? And why did NASA deliberately relinquish the 14-ton spacecraft into the moon on purpose, and then go quiet about what the seismometers recorded? By the end of this video, you are not going to have a comfortable answer to any of those questions. But you are going to understand exactly what the data shows and why the moon you think you know is not the moon that exists in the files. What you are about to hear in this video is not speculation. It is not fringe theory. It is documented data. From NASA archives, peer-reviewed scientific papers, the recorded statements of people who walked on the moon, and instrument readings that have been publicly available for decades, but rarely discussed in the same place at the same time. By the end of this video, you will understand why the moon is the single most scientifically honest object in our solar system, why it breaks nearly every model have for how natural satellites form, why serious planetary scientists publishing in serious journals have acknowledged open questions about the lunar interior that remain unresolved, why multiple Apollo astronauts spent the rest of their lives publicly contradicting the official record, why there is significantly more water on the moon than a dry, airless world should be able to retain, why certain official NASA imagines continent formations that have never been explained by standard geological processes, and what the first humans to observe the lunar far side in 50 years said when they came back and chose their words very carefully. I am going to take you through each of these one by one, and I am going to let the evidence aspect. Let us go back to November 1969. The Apollo 12 mission had just completed its second lunar surface EVA. Commander Pete Conrad and the Lanbian had collected rock samples, planted instruments, and done everything on the mission checklist. Now was time to leave. The ascent stage of the Lunar module, the section that carries the astronauts off surface, had done its job. So mission controllers made a decision. Rather than letting it drift into space, they directed the ascent stage back toward the lunar surface on a controlled collision course. The impact was calculated to strike the moon at a known velocity and angle. The seismometers that the crew had placed on the surface would record what happened. This was planetary science in action. The same principle geologists USITO study Earth's interior by monitoring how seismic waves propagate through rock. What they expected was a sharp spike of seismic activity followed by gradual dampening as the energy dissipated through the lunar crust. Standard behavior for a solid rocky body. The seismometers recorded 5 minutes of organized reverberation, not chaotic noise. Structured, resonant vibration that slowly decreased in amplitude maintained its character far longer than any model of a solid rocky body would predict. The scientists were puzzled but continued. They noted the result, flagged ITOS anomalies, and moved on with the program. 3 years later they tried ITAGAN, this time on a far larger scale. The SIVB upper stage of the Saturn V rocket used for Apollo 17 was a massive piece of hardware, 14 metric tons of aluminum alloy and fuel systems. After its job was done, mission controllers directed it on a precise impact trajectory. The collision released energy equivalent to approximately 11 tons of TNT. The seismometers left behind by multiple Apollo missions all recorded the impact simultaneously, and what they recorded ran for 3 hours and 20 minutes. Dr. Lon Ho at the Lunar and Planetary Laboratory at the University of Arizona spent years analyzing the complete seismic dataset from all Apollo missions. His conclusion, published in peer-reviewed journals, was clear. The seismic behavior of the Moon is inconsistent with what we would expect from a solid or uniformly dense body. The wave propagation patterns, the way the energy moved through the interior, the characteristic frequencies of the oscillation, all of it pointed to an interior that was structured differently from what our models predicted. Not just slightly different, structurally different in a way that no standard model of lunar formation has cleanly resolved. And here is the detail that makes this stranger. Every other rocky body in the solar system that we have tested seismically responds in ways consistent with its known composition. When the Mars InSight lander recorded Marsquakes, the data matched our models of the Martian interior within expected parameters. When we have modeled the seismic behavior of large asteroids, the results are consistent with the physics of solid rock and metal. The Moon does not behave that way. Its seismic signature has never been fully reproduced by any computer simulation of a natural rocky satellite. This has been noted in the scientific literature. It has not been resolved. The ringing is strange, but the seismic anomaly is not even close to the most puzzling thing about our Moon. The most puzzling thing is that Moon exists at all in the configuration that it does. Let me explain what I mean by that. In our solar system there are hundreds of moons orbiting various planets. Mars has 2 small irregular captured asteroids called Phobos and Deimos. Their orbits are chaotic, their shapes are irregular, they behave exactly like objects that were captured by Martian gravity from the nearby asteroid belt. Jupiter has dozens of moons. The 4 large Galilean moons, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, formed in the disk-off material that surrounded Jupiter as it grew. They orbit in the plane of the solar system. They follow Kepler's laws precisely. They behave exactly as objects formed by accretion should behave. Saturn's moon system is complex, but it follows logical patterns. The large moons formed with Saturn's smaller moons are a mix of captured objects and fragments. Every major moon in the solar system makes physical sense when you understand the environment it formed in. Our Moon does not. The first problem is its size. The Moon is 27% the diameter of Earth. That is an enormous ratio. No other major planet in the solar system has a moon that is anything close to that proportion of the planet-sound size. Mars's largest moon, Phobos, is less than 1% of Mars's diameter. Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, is enormous, but Jupiter itself is much larger, so the ratio is nothing like ours. Our moon is so large relative to Earth that some planetary scientists have classified the Earth-Moon system as a double planet rather than a planet and its satellite. The second problem is the orbit. The moon's orbit is nearly circular, not approximately circular, nearly perfectly circular. Natural orbits formed by capture events or by the chaotic dynamics of early solar system accretion tend to be elliptical. The more violent the formation event, the more elliptical the orbit. The leading theory for how the moon formed is the giant impact hypothesis. Under this model, a Mars-sized object called Theia collided with the early Earth approximately 4.5 billion years ago. The collision ejected a massive cloud of debris that eventually coalesced into the moon. It is a violent, energetic, chaotic event, and yet the moon orbits in a nearly perfect circle. The physics of that are uncomfortable. The third problem is the one that stops conversations at astronomical conferences. The moon is exactly the right size and at exactly the right distance to produce a perfect solar eclipse as seen from Earth. The sun's diameter is approximately 400 times larger than the moon's diameter. The sun's distance from Earth is approximately 400 times greater than the moon's distance from Earth. These two ratios cancel out precisely. The result is that from Earth's surface the moon and the sun appear to be almost exactly the same size in the sky. During a total solar eclipse, the moon covers the sun's photosphere almost perfectly, close enough that the solar corona becomes visible. The thin, tenuous outer atmosphere of the sun that is invisible at any other time. No other planet in the solar system has a moon that produces this kind of eclipse. Not one. Planetary scientists have noted this. The probability of this occurring by geometric coincidence in a natural system has been discussed. The numbers are not comfortable. No one has a satisfying explanation for why our moon is precisely calibrated to this relationship. In 1968, before any human being had set foot on the lunar surface, NASA launched a series of robotic orbiters to photograph and map the moon in preparation for the Apollo program. These were the lunar orbiter missions, and they were engineering marvels for their time. But the scientists responsible for tracking these spacecraft noticed something that had nothing to do with photography. As the orbiters passed over certain regions of the lunar surface, their flight path changed slightly. The spacecraft experienced small but measurable gravitational pulls that were stronger than the surrounding terrain could account for. At first, the tracking team assumed there was a problem with their measurements or their models. But the effect was consistent. Mission after mission, orbiter after orbiter, something beneath the lunar surface in specific locations was generating gravitational fields significantly stronger than the surrounding rock. The scientists named these features mascons, short for mass concentrations. The name describes exactly what they appear to be. Regions of unusually dense material buried beneath the lunar surface. After the Apollo missions, more detailed mapping became possible. The picture that emerged was striking. The mascons are not randomly distributed across the lunar surface. They are concentrated almost exclusively beneath the large circular basaltic plains known as the lunar mare. The flat dark regions that you can't see from Earth with the naked eye. the regions that ancient people thought looked like seas. Now think about what that means. The lunar mare are the floors of ancient impact craters. They were formed when massive asteroids or comets struck the moon billions of years ago with enormous kinetic energy. Those impacts blasted material away from the surface. They excavated deep basins. They should have left regions of lower density, not higher density. The physics of impact events does not produce concentrations of extremely dense material at the impact site. It scatters material outward, and yet directly beneath these impact basins sit some of the densest concentrations of subsurface material on the moon. The standard scientific equation is that the mascons are the remnants of the impactors themselves, massive iron-nickel asteroids that struck the moon and buried themselves in the crust. But when planetary scientists model this, they run into a problem. For an impactor to bury itself and leave a concentration of denser material at depth requires a very specific set of conditions. The angle has to be right, the velocity has to be right, the density of the target material has to be just so. When you run the models for the known mascon locations and the inferred impactor properties, the results do not cleanly reproduce the observed gravity signatures. The mascon distributions are too regular, too geometrically organized. The GRAIL mission launched in 2011 produced the most detailed gravity map of the moon in history. 2 spacecraft flew in precise formation, measuring minute variations in their relative positions caused by lunar gravity. The resulting gravity map was extraordinary in its resolution, and it showed that the mascon structures were more complex, more layered, and more geometrically organized than anyone had anticipated. Maria Zuber at MIT, who led the GRAIL mission, published findings that acknowledged the mascon structures raised ongoing questions about the lunar interior that remain to be resolved. Those questions remain open today. 12 human beings walked on the surface of the moon between July 1969 and December 1972. They were selected from thousands of candidates. They were military test pilots, aeronautical engineers, Navy and Air Force officers who had flown experimental aircraft at the boundaries of the atmosphere. They were trained to observe and report with precision. They were the opposite of unreliable witnesses, and several of them spent years after Apollo making statements that the official record never addressed. Edgar Mitchell was the Lunar module pilot on Apollo 14. He landed in the Femoral Highlands in February 1971. He spent 33 hours on the lunar surface, including 2 moonwalks totaling more than 9 hours. He carried a doctorate in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT. He was a naval aviator and had flown over 40 types of aircraft. After Apollo, Mitchell founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences and spent the rest of his life arguing from personal conviction that what he had experienced and what he had been told in classified briefings convinced him beyond reasonable doubt that humanity was not the only technological civilization in the universe. He named specific individuals who had confirmed the existence of recovered hardware from non-terrestrial sources. He testified to this in formal settings. He said it on the record, he said it in interviews, he said it until he died. In 2016, the scientific community largely dismissed him, but dismissal is not the same as refutation. Gordon Cooper was one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. He flew the longest solo American flight of the Mercury era and later flew on Gemini 5. In 1957, while stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in California, Cooper witnessed a disc-shaped metallic craft hover silently over a dry lake bed. A film crew from the base was present and captured footage of the object. Cooper filed an official military report. The footage was confiscated and classified. Cooper spent decades afterwards saying publicly that the footage was real, the object was real, the cover-up was real. Then there are the in-mission reports. The Apollo mission transcripts contain numerous exchanges between astronauts and mission control that were publicly released but rarely examined closely. During Apollo 11, researchers who have reviewed the full transcript record have identified exchanges in which the astronauts appear to be discussing observations of objects they were not expecting to see. Some of these exchanges occurred in frequencies that were not part of the primary broadcast. Ham radio operators monitoring the mission reported picking up transmissions on alternate channels. The specific content of those transmissions has been disputed for decades. What is not disputed is that Apollo astronauts observed and reported unidentified objects during multiple missions. Those reports are in the official record. Apollo 11 logged anomalous object sightings during the translunar coast. Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean reported unusual lights during the lunar orbit phase. Apollo 16 astronaut John Young photographed objects on the lunar surface that were described in the mission report as anomalous. These reports were filed, they were logged, they are accessible through NASA archives. None of them was ever officially explained. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus on the moon was absolute. The moon was completely dry, no water in any form anywhere on surface or in the subsurface. This was not a tentative conclusion. It was treated as settled. The reasoning was straightforward. The moon has no atmosphere worth mentioning. The surface is exposed to direct solar radiation and the solar wind. Any water ice at or near the surface would be sublimated, converted directly from solid to vapor, and lost to space almost immediately. There was no mechanism to generate water. There was no mechanism to retain it. The moon was dead and dry. That consensus began to crack in 1998 when the Lunar Prospector spacecraft detected hydrogen signatures concentrated near the lunar poles. Hydrogen readings that were consistent with water ice buried in the permanently shadowed craters at the poles. Those craters never see sunlight. The temperatures inside them are among the lowest in the entire solar system. Around 40 Kelvin, which is minus 233 degrees Celsius. Water ice in those conditions does not sublime it. It simply sits there frozen for billions of years. The scientific community was cautiously interested but not convinced. In 2009, NASA decided to test the hypothesis directly. They directed the CROSS spacecraft on a collision course with Cabeus crater near the South Pole. The impact was watched by every space telescope that could be pointed at the moon, and by ground-based observatories on the world. The plume of material ejected by the impact was analyzed for water content. They found water. 155 kilograms of water ice in a single crater. The moon is not dry. In 2018, using data from the Moon Mineralogy Mapper instrument that had flown on India's Chandrayaan-1 spacecraft, scientists confirmed the presence of crystalline water ice directly on the surface in permanently shadowed polar regions, not beneath the surface on the surface. In 2020, using the SOFIA airborne telescope, a converted Boeing 747 2.5-meter infrared telescope, NASA confirmed the presence of water molecules in sunlit regions of the lunar surface, not just in permanently shadowed areas, in areas that receive direct sunlight. This was fundamentally unexpected. Water in sunlit areas on a world with no atmosphere should not survive. Yet it was there. In 2021, a team analyzing lunar samples that had been sitting in storage at the Johnson Space Center since the Apollo era made a discovery that changed the picture again. They found microscopic glass beads within the rock samples. These beads had been formed by ancient volcanic eruptions on the moon billions of years ago. And trapped inside the glass were water molecules. A lot of water molecules, more than any model of a dry moon could account for. The researchers estimated that the volcanic processes that produced these beads had outgassed enormous quantities of water onto the lunar surface billions of years ago, much more than the dry moon model had ever predicted. When scientists added together Kepler ice deposits, the surface water, and the water locked in volcanic glass, the total implied water inventory on the moon was strikingly large, far larger than a world with no outer cycle, no oceans, no rain, and no atmosphere should be able to hold. The distribution patterns, the concentrations, the specific locations, they remain incompletely explained. I want to be precise about what I'm going to tell you in this section.
4, 3, 2, 1.
I am drawing entirely
Booster
from
ignition
official NASA
and
imagery
liftoff of Discovery,
and from published
hoisting
scientific
harmony
and
to the
technical
heavens
analysis
and opening new
that
gateways
imagery.
for international science.
I am not
Discovery
going
has
to
cleared
tell
the
you
tower.
what these observations mean.
Houston now controlling.
I am going to tell you what has been observed and what the official response has been.
Discovery's roll maneuver is complete. Is now in a heads-down position
In
on track for its flight to the
1966, the
International
Lunar
Space
Orbiter
Station.
spacecraft was photographing the lunar surface in the region known as the Sea of Tranquility. One of the returned images showed objects on the surface casting long regular shadows. The shadows were not consistent with the surrounding terrain. They originated from what appeared to be vertical protrusions rising above the surface. Vertical structures arranged in a pattern. NASA scientists reviewing the images at the time described the objects as spires. They noted them as extraordinary and unlike anything in their geological models. The images were published, they appeared in press releases, they were discussed at scientific meetings. They were never satisfactorily explained. A follow-up imaging pass of the same region confirmed the objects were present and were casting real shadows, not photographic artifacts. Note image processing vertical structures of some kind standing above the lunar surface. In the decades since, researchers have systematically analyzed the full photographic archive from every lunar mission. The Lunar Orbiter archive contains thousands of images. The Apollo mission image archive contains tens of thousands. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has been imaging the moon at extremely high resolution since 2009, has produced the most detailed photographic record of the lunar surface ever compiled. And across all of these archives, independent researchers have identified numerous regions where formations appear to be geometrically precise in ways that natural geological processes do not typically produce. Right angles where natural rocks rarely form right angles. Repeated arch structures that appear too regular for random erosion. Cylindrical passage-like features that resemble lava tubes but with proportions inconsistent with known volcanic processes. Dome structures over certain crater floors with curvatures that do not match the expected profile of volcanic domes. NASA's standard response to these observations is that they are natural geological formations. Lava tube collapses, unusual crystallized patterns, optical illusions created by grazing angle light. And for most of the identified anomalies, that explanation is probably correct. The moon is a geologically complex world with a 4.5 billion year history of volcanism impacts and thermal cycling. Natural processes on the scale can produce unusual formations. But the archive is enormous, and the number of features that time-dependent researchers have cataloged as geometrically anomalous has grown with every increase in imaging resolution, not shrunk. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has in many cases resolved previously mysterious features into clearly natural formation, but it has also revealed new features at higher resolution that raise new questions. There are currently several hundred catalogued regions of the lunar surface, where independent researchers have documented formations they say are inconsistent with standard geological models. The scientific community has firmly investigated none of them. In April 2024, 4 astronauts boarded an Orion capsule and flew to the Moon. Commander Reed Wiseman piloted Victor Glover mission specialist Christina Koch and Canadian Space Agency mission specialist Jeremy Hansen. This was Artemis II, the first crewed mission to lunar vicinity since Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt lifted off from the Taurus Littrow Valley in December 1972, more than 50 years. The crew did not land. Their mission was a free return trajectory that took them on a loop around the Moon. But that loop took them around the other side, the hemisphere we have never been able to see from Earth, the side that has been hidden from human eyes throughout all of recorded history. The crew spent time in low lunar orbit observing the surface they photographed. They communicated with mission control. They documented what they saw. When they returned to Earth and began their public appearances, the response from the crew to questions about what they observed had a consistent quality, precision, the careful use of specific words that communicated something while staying within boundaries. Commander Wiseman, appearing on The Tonight Show, was asked directly, "What did you see on the dark side?" He smiled. He looked at his crew. He said, "It was not what we expected." Then he said, "The Moon is more complex than anyone told us." That is a direct quote from a sitting NASA mission commander referring to his direct observation of the lunar far side from low orbit. More complex than anyone told us, not what we expected. Those are not the words of someone who spent 3 days looking at impact craters and basaltic plains. Those are words chosen by someone who has been briefed on exactly what he can say in a public setting and exactly what cannot. I am not telling you there is a base on the far side of the Moon. I am telling you that the commander of the most recent human mission to lunar vicinity said publicly that what he observed was more complex than what he was told to expect, and that no one in the mainstream press asked him a single follow-up question. Here's where we land. Everything in this video is documented. The seismic ringing, the anomalies, mask and distributions, the statements of Apollo astronauts, the water volumes that no dry world model explains, then resolved structures in the official archive, the words of the Artemis to commander. None of it is fabricated. None of it requires anonymous sources or conspiracy forums. These are NASA mission record scientific papers written by credentialed researchers and published in peer-reviewed journals, formal congressional testimony, and the recorded words of people who have been to the Moon. What does it all mean? I genuinely do not know, and I think anyone who tells you they know with certainty is not being honest with you. What I know is that the Moon has been studied more intensively than any other object in space besides Earth. We have put 12 people on its surface. We have left seismometers and gravity sensors and retroreflectors. We have analyzed its rocks. We have crashed spacecraft into it on purpose. We have mapped its gravity field with extraordinary precision. We have detected water where an outer should be. We have photographed its surface from orbit for over 60 years. And after all of that, the Moon still does not fully behave the way our models say it should. The seismic anomaly has not been resolved. The Mascon distributions have not been fully explained. The polar water inventory is larger than it should be. The geometry of the Moon-Sun eclipse relationship has no parallel in the solar system. And the most recent human being to observe it up close said it was more complex than anyone told them. The Moon is 384,000 kilometers away. We can see it with the naked ivory clear night. And we still do not fully understand what it is.